That is it for everything in the Bible. It took us 2 weeks to look at everything that the Bible says about speaking in tongues. There's not much there. Not much there, which I think goes along with what Paul has said, that it is the least of the gifts. We don't need to have a whole lot about the gift of tongues because it's the least of the gifts. So we spent 6 weeks talking about prophecy because there's so much more in the Bible about that. So anyway, now that we have gone through all of everything that the Bible says about speaking in tongues, let's take a look again at our questions and see if we have found some answers, okay? So we start off with, what exactly is the gift of tongues? Now, I think from what we have read that we see 3 different kinds of tongues described. The first one would be the Acts 2 situation at the Pentecost, where someone needs to hear the gospel message, but there is no one who speaks their language. And so that is a very specific kind of situation. So that would be the first kind of tongues. The second kind of tongues would be this private prayer language that Paul talks about, where you are speaking only to God. And the third type would be this kind that where a word from God comes through somebody in a tongue. And as long as somebody has the gift of interpretation, then the interpretation would come out. And this would be a message from God to a specific body of believers in a church. So we've got 3 different kinds of tongues described in Acts and Corinthians. Okay, so what is the purpose of the gift of tongues? So this is related to the 3 different kinds because there's a different purpose for each of these 3 kinds of tongues. So the Acts 2 kinds of tongues, obviously, the purpose is to spread the gospel message. So the second kind, the private prayer language, the reason for that, the purpose would be, as Paul says, for the edification of the speaker. And I can attest to that. It is very comforting. It is a miraculous act because of the way that I got the gift of speaking in tongues, as I explained last week. I know that it is a miraculous thing. It is not me speaking gibberish. It is from God. And so it comforts me. It increases my faith. So it edifies the speaker. And then the third kind of tongues, which is when God would give a word to a specific body of believers, to a church, and then somebody has the gift of interpretation and could interpret what that tongue was. And so that third kind of tongues is the only kind that has that stipulation that it should only be practiced when there is someone who has the gift of interpretation. So I believe those are 3 different kinds of tongues.